Welcome to Cosmopolitics. Sorry for those technical difficulties. I've been in television for 25 years. I still can't figure it out on my own. Hopefully, if you become a paid subscriber to Cosmopolitics and the Radical Pragmatist, we can hire a producer to get this stuff together. I've done a few, but I could use a little extra help. So just an extra incentive. After you hear this conversation, you're going to want to be a paid subscriber. Welcome to Cosmopolitics. I'm Elise Labott. And I want to introduce Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, who, as I've been saying, is really one of the most thoughtful voices on the war in Gaza. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having inviting me to speak to you, and I like these longer format discussions, and hopefully your followers and audience finds it interesting.
So you're at the Atlantic Council now, and tell me what you're doing there. You have a kind of center called Realign for Palestine. What is that?
So it's a project within the under the umbrella of the Middle East Center, the Middle East programs at the Atlantic Council. So Realign for Palestine is the culmination of uh, really all my efforts since the October 7 tragedy and the war in Gaza, of basically turning. Realign for Palestine is me turning a passion project into a professional operation. And that is trying to use the principles of radical pragmatism, embracing multiple truths, rejecting violence, embracing the two-nation solution as a broad aspiration for the resolution of the Israel and Palestine conflict, and really pursuing both a shift in narrative as well as promulgating pragmatic policy ideas that could move the needle on this issue. And so, what I hope to achieve through Realign for Palestine is to create both a framework, a kind of a mindset, but also infrastructure that can support like-minded Palestinian allies and partners, and um, who are wanting a new vision of what it means to be pro-Palestine, what it means to be Palestinian, away from some of the problematic trends that have emerged since October 7, and more towards actually constructive, meaningful end games and outcomes that build a better future for the Palestinian people, that plant the seeds of tolerance and healing and reconciliation in pursuit of durable coexistence and peace. And so there's narrative work, and then there's policy work, and that's ultimately what Realign for Palestine is.
All right, I think we need to let everybody know who you are. You're from Gaza originally. Is that where you grew up?
Yes, so I lived in Gaza until the age of 15. I grew up there and came to the United States in 2005. I left Gaza 1 month before the withdrawal of Israeli settlements, or what's known as the disengagement, and was supposed to be here living with a host family, an American host family, for a year, and then go back to Gaza and plant seeds for cultural bridges. Unfortunately, Hamas had taken over in Gaza, and starting with the 2006 parliamentary elections, and then there was the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit, when a young Israeli soldier, when I was in Egypt, about to cross back into Gaza. And so what that did is it resulted in the closure of the borders between Egypt and Gaza. And I was there for several months until I managed to get back, thanks to the support of human rights and peace activists in the United States, who made it possible for me to come back here, finish high school. I began applying for political asylum because my participation in the program invited a lot of scrutiny from Hamas and Islamists. It was a novelty in a Palestinian context to have teenagers go to the United States and live there. And ironically, the very day of my asylum interview was June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. So I was the first of a wave of Palestinians to get asylum in the United States because of the group's control of the territory. and became a citizen in 2014. That was roughly 11 years ago, and lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. But about 14 months ago, I moved out to Washington, D.C., where I currently live.
I want to talk. You've lost by now maybe like 3 dozen or close to 3 dozen family members in this war, including your aunt who opened up her home to displaced families. Your uncle was a retired surgeon who was killed sheltering dozens, used his thumb to plug a teenager's wound. Yet you've maintained this remarkable clarity about both Israeli and Palestinian suffering. And I'm just curious, and I think everyone would want to know, how do you hold that complexity when the losses you've suffered are so immediate and personal and profound?
It's certainly not easy. It's certainly I'm not a robot. I'm a human just like everyone else. I feel the same emotions. I have the same emotional tendencies. I am angry, upset, resentful, all of the above. But what I work really hard to separate is the any movement towards hate. I feel that that is a different feeling that generates a whole set of associated problems that lead to violence, dehumanization, incitement, revenge, rinse and repeat. And I want to break away from that vicious cycle. I want that to be my contribution to my people. I want that to be my my how I choose to honor the legacy of my fallen family members. And listen, by the way, I even in among some of our extended family members, I mean, there are people that are, you know, not exactly totally aligned in that thought process. Not that they're going to pick up guns and go do something, but just that they're particularly those who are living in Gaza, and have endured the horrors of the last 2 years. And there are folks who struggle in overcoming the trauma and what that means to them, and likewise for a lot of Israelis. But again, I have made a point of connecting with hostage families, survivors of October 7th, and being an ally in mutual healing. And again, that's not kumbaya. That's not another, like, just healing circle. Let's hold hands and
Right.
everything is fine. These are very tough, difficult steps. But also, to me, this is actually a very pragmatic set of steps that lead to meaningful policy changes, because I had been in the past part of dialogue initiatives. And while they're helpful and I welcome any space for mutual engagement between Jews, Israelis, self identified Zionists, and Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, I would like to kind of build upon that dialogue, if you will, in pursuit of greater steps. And so that's what I choose to pursue something different. And it's difficult. It's costly. It has, a lot of people. I mean, as you can imagine, not just in terms of being ostracized from some
You
circles.
face
From
threats, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like really, and not. I don't mean. I mean, I'm not just talking about mean comments on
No,
Twitter.
security threats. Yeah.
Precisely, precisely. And yet I wouldn't, if time were to go back, I wouldn't do this differently. I feel I'm proud of the positions and the clarity that I've had. I am proud of overcoming the challenges, and actually if anything, I do hold Hamas responsible. I mean, I listen. I'm not. There are elements of the Israeli government that I absolutely have no. I mean, I have a lot of problems with the Israeli government and policies and actions, and I want to model what does it look like to actually have like policy disagreements. What does it look like to
We could use
like
some of that here. Yeah.
but versus what is actually like, where is that line between deep, deep problems with the government of Israel and members of Israeli society versus anti Semitism, versus horrendous, violent inducing rhetoric, and at times even genocidal rhetoric.
Right.
And so that is something I want to model, but I think that can be achieved without, without really compromising one's set of moral ethics and morality. And I've lost friends along the way. I've lost family members. I've lost people that even people that I met during the war who were allies, but then over time, they've succumbed to the propaganda, the pressure, the pain of watching the suffering. To me, I hold Hamas responsible for our people's suffering. I think that my family would still be alive if Hamas had not had simply kept its soldiers at home on October 7th. I hold Hamas responsible for 2 decades of squandering our people's resources and lives. And so do many in the Gaza Strip who are simply too afraid to speak out. And so this is another avenue that I wanted to channel my anger and frustration and rage, is that I wanted to expose Hamas and expose the rotten, corrupt resistance narrative that it has hid behind. And the sad and heartbreaking thing is that that narrative has now become a global, worldwide phenomenon. People love it. You have government officials around the world, you have ambassadors, you have journalists, you have academia, you have the
Right.
fanciest names who are not Palestinian, who are not Arab, who are not Muslim. Some of the whitest of people around the world are now the biggest cheerleaders for Hamas at a time when many, I would say the majority in Gaza, even if that's not captured with verbal statements or media or surveys, which are all BS and inaccurate, are turning against Hamas. You actually have Hamas becoming a transnational phenomenon that receives widespread support. And to me, that is genuinely terrifying. That is genuinely problematic, not just because it's bad for Israelis and anti-Semitism and on all of that, but because I actually think that's horrible for the Palestinian people and for our
Yeah.
people in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, as a Jewish person, I've faced it too. It's like you can't criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic or a self-loathing Jew or things like that. And so I feel like the empathy you've been able to show for both sides, which I try to do, um, is remarkable. You've said that Palestinians have, I'm going to quote you, fucking horrible allies who glorify October 7th as resistance. And I'm wondering, why has the pro-Palestine movement become so counterproductive in that sense to actual Palestinian interests? To say like, to not, I mean, I understand, Hamas is controlling Gaza. It's not like you can have protests in the streets, but why has the pro-Palestine movement become more anti-Israel than anti-Hamas, as you're saying?
Well, so I mean, there are probably different threads to pull at here. The first is, I think, the scale of the horror that has been unfolding in Gaza has just mobilized and pulled in a lot of people who historically would not have engaged this issue. And so you have a lot of, with all due respect to all people from all background, relatively low information activists and
Yeah.
advocates kind of joining
It's in
the
both.
tent. Precisely. So then you have so that's number one. Number two is that I do think the tactical short-term success of Hamas on October 7th in the initial phase of the attack created this euphoric misunderstanding in the minds of a lot of people that actually Hamas's quote unquote resistance can succeed. Hamas's quote unquote resistance can liberate and hold territory. Hamas's resistance can bring the issue back to the global headlines at a time when many had moved on from the conflict. And so that created an impact for a lot of people who were like, oh, Hamas seems legit. Hamas is, again, low information people. Then the third element, I would say, is a very well directed, well managed, nefarious campaign by conglomerate of media, academia, and a network of activists, some of whom have just been around, some of whom I personally believe, and I don't have the like smoking gun, here's the receipt evidence, but I believe were funded externally
I
um,
know.
by the Qatars of the world. Um, but there wasn't like, here's funding, go foment this. It was more of like, oh, we're going to fund your Center for Middle East Studies, Center for Arabic
But
Studies.
they know the messaging coming out of them, so it's not, blind faith that they'll do. They knew what they were funding.
Precisely that, precisely that. And it was some of that preceded October, like that
Right.
infrastructure was being built over time. And the AJ pluses of the world and Al Jazeera's and all the different, we can name a ton of names of alternative independent medias and all the different podcasts and all the staple personality names that are all over Twitter and YouTube. And so then those people started engaging in all sorts of moral equivalencies and well, this didn't begin on October 7th. This is the result of 70 years of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there was just this fraudulent inevitability narrative that was sold about how October 7th was an inevitability because Gaza was an open air prison. Gaza was this. Hamas tried to engage in peace. Hamas tried to change its charter in 2017. Then I would go a step further and add that Hamas's own media productions and media efforts and operations were quite sophisticated with a massive outlet like Al Jazeera, a transnational outlet that was able, a state actor as well behind the group. And then finally, I would say that the sheer horror of the war and the sheer brutality of Israel's war on Gaza has led many, had and has led many to just become equally callous. And we did see some horrendous things happening throughout the war. There were elements of the war that I would argue seemed more punitive rather than
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
tactically or militarily beneficial.
Right.
And so people in turn became callous. And there was very much so this vicious cycle of, well, some Israeli soldiers or commanders or whatever did some horrendous acts. So therefore, we just by default, the only ones standing, quote unquote, standing up to them are Hamas. And so we're just going to support Hamas. Or we need revenge upon Israeli soldiers in there. So when I see Israeli soldiers being killed, I'm going to celebrate that without
Because they
registering.
deserve it.
But they deserve it, but without registering that whenever an attack happened and a bunch of Israeli soldiers were killed, the counter battery fire that came in would like kill. And I'm not saying I support it. I'm just saying
Right.
this is a fact. The counter battery fire would kill like 5 times the number of Palestinian civilians. So like there were many people who would tell Hamas during the war, go away. Don't come anywhere near us. Like don't. And some of those people faced retribution from Hamas for doing so. So that the aforementioned, the totality of which is to say that unfortunately you had a confluence of reasons and events and conditions and circumstances and set of players that cumulatively um, really set the stage for Hamas to become mainstreamed and legitimized as a player that deserves to be listened to, that deserves their talking points being, treated with moral equivalency and all of that again to the detriment of the Palestinian narrative, because I feel that Hamas served the Palestinian people, the vulnerable Palestinian people of Gaza, on a silver platter to the most far right and horrendous government in Israel's history.
Right.
That, by the way, we also know Mr. Netanyahu, this is not hyperbole, this is like well documented, had let Qatar bring in suitcases full of cash.
Just he created Hamas in a way.
Like Hamas wouldn't be what it
Mold
is,
in that.
right now without direct policies by Netanyahu. And this isn't just me, folks. This is Ehud Barak and former
Right.
prime ministers and defense ministers and heads of Shin Bet, and they're not anti-Semitic. Like they're saying we created a monster and the monster turned on us. So it's not that like Israel like one for one said, okay, Hamas, go do this, go do that. But it was this fallacy of, okay, well, we're going to play this 3D game and keep the Palestinians in Gaza here with Hamas and then the PA over there. And we don't want them to be united because that's the two-state solution. No, we're going to keep Gaza isolated. We're going to keep the West Bank here and expand settlements, boom, boom. But I believe Hamas was a key enabler of that and is therefore worthy of delegitimization, worthy of contempt, worthy of being called out, not being legitimized and not being acknowledged. Like if you're actually pro-Palestine and you
You're
want
not pro
justice,
Hamas, right?
you really need to understand the aforementioned and be like, yeah, I no, I need to separate Hamas. And I'll say one from the Palestinian people, and I'll say just it was that these dynamics, because I worked in international development and philanthropy in Africa for the 8 years leading up to October 7th. And I mean, I did a lot of projects on the side. I got a degree in intelligence and national security. 10 years ago, I did a project trying to build an internationally run, Israeli approved airfield in Gaza. And I had a chance to talk to Israelis and Palestinians. I talked to Sinwar. I talked to Israeli leadership. I wrote about this in Newsweek, by the way. It's not a secret that I spoke to Sinwar and what he said. Um, and so, like, my main job was philanthropy and development in Africa around global health and poverty alleviation, and with working bits and pieces here and there on the sidelines. But I decided to go all in because I genuinely felt that there was an existential crisis of epic proportions facing the very Palestinian cause, because I felt that Hamas was
Hijack.
being normalized and hijacking the entirety of the cause. And I felt that it was dangerous to equate Gaza with Hamas when Hamas is simply a component of Gaza.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib of the Atlantic Council, and he also writes The Radical Pragmatist on Substack. Let's just talk about post-deal. We saw that Hamas has kind of come out of their bunkers, rested and well-fed from, and reasserted themselves on the streets of Gaza, executing Palestinians and just reasserting control. And I think it's really interesting that all of the people that were protesting what was happening to the Palestinians under Israel are not protesting what Hamas is doing to the Palestinians now. Likewise, the Israelis, they have been supporting some militias, but still, I feel like now the Palestinians, they're taking it from both sides. You know what I mean? They're suffering from Hamas at the hands of Israel. They're taking the incoming, and then they're also taking it from Hamas. How did the Palestinians break free of this hold that Hamas has in Gaza and is, I'm sure reconstituting now in the West Bank in the light of the end of the conflict there?
So I would argue that it's not just that many are silent, many are actually supportive of Hamas killing people because they're just saying, wow, they're just gangsters and looters. Which, by the way, those are the same people that here domestically, for example, they're against police violence, even against actual criminals. They're like, Black Lives Matter, even when it entails somebody who is a danger and a threat. It's like, oh, well, why didn't you just shoot them in the foot? Oh, why didn't you just use a baton? Oh, why didn't you just tase them? You know, all of a sudden, those people are citing examples of the French resistance or the Algerian resistance or all of these movements. And they're like, oh, yeah, traitors and collaborators, they all get killed and they all get this. Forgetting the fact that Hamas could simply manufacture a charge. Hamas could simply manufacture like a petty disagreement can end with, oh, he's a collaborator. Okay, let's finish him off. Bye bye. So, this is what's so horrendous. And this is why I have been speaking out so strongly against what is taking place. I'm not denying that there were criminals in Gaza during the war time. And my brother is in there right now. He runs the field operations for a major medical NGO. I have family members. I have other family members. I've friends and allies and opposition. Like I knew like what was going on during the war. There were also militias that formed organically. Some of them have been there long before October 7th. Some of them were supported by Israel. Some of them were not. So there's just all of these different nuances. And Hamas basically created a singular umbrella and said, we're going after Israeli funded collaborators and criminals. And under this umbrella, even the slightest of transgressions were very harshly punished and pursued. What I'm saying is, it's the same. It's kind of like, think of the United States harsh reaction out like after 9/11 of just this blanket, like we're going after the war on terror. Like this is very common in statecraft and in nations, whereby they declare a broad enemy and then try to squeeze all opposition underneath it. I'm not saying we necessarily did that in the United States, but we did accept mass surveillance, the likes of which we never had tolerated in the US. That's a whole separate issue. Point being is that Hamas, very much so, has been going after people's social media. Some people, they went after this guy because he went into GHF, a food distribution site, and he said, "Thank you, Trump. Thank you, Netanyahu, America." Oh, and he was like, he's a silly guy. He's like an entertainer, like food. Yes, he was like, I just want free food. He was like, and this was like during the height of the like hunger crisis, and then they broke his legs, they broke his feet, and then they made him say, "Oh, Hamas is here. Hamas is not going anywhere. Hamas is one." And then they went after another dude and beat the crap out of him and broke his legs and knees because he insulted God. So this is like them moving in an ISIS direction, and so on and on and on and on. These things that have nothing to do with gangs or with Israeli affiliated collaborators. That's unfortunately what's happening on the ground in Gaza. And then the UN has the audacity to come out today and say, well, actually, since the ceasefire and Hamas came back, there's been no looting of our trucks, which is true. But what I know from senior U.S. officials and Israeli officials and Arab officials is that the UN was offered at multiple times different creative ideas and different solutions to think outside of the box for providing them with security to deliver food to their warehouses so that they could distribute the food. And so that and then when Hamas but they said no, they wanted to work exclusively with Hamas. Now the Israeli military was picking a lot of these guys off and also getting rid of them elsewhere. Hamas largely vanished. And so, and then the UN kept giving this moral lecture, which is just so classic UN, about no, aid should not be militarized. Aid delivery should not be weaponized. Aid delivery should not have armed people with it, which is funny because they literally just had Hamas before. But then now that Hamas is back, the UN is happy because now Hamas is back to protecting those convoys. and preventing the looting. And so the looting has stopped. So what does that tell us? Like, I'm not here making excuses for Israeli policies that absolutely worsened the hunger crisis in Gaza, that absolutely played a role in the catastrophes of Gaza, both humanitarian and otherwise, and security. I am
Well,
simply saying that my whole ethos is that both all players in general, but it's like, especially from a radical pragmatism point of view, when it comes to the Palestinian people, my thesis is within the imbalance of power dynamics, with Israel having overwhelming power over the Palestinian people, even within said imbalance, there's still space for some Palestinian agency, responsibility, and accountability. And that is not blaming the victims. That is not self-hatred. In fact, that is the first step to empowering the Palestinian people, is giving them some control, such that October 7th was a choice. It was not an inevitability. Same thing with other players, such as the United Nations. I think they made specific choices, and I think some of those choices did not optimize for the best outcome for the Palestinian people. And so where we are right now is that, and just to be clear, the other thing is the people of Gaza, a lot of them are terrified of lawlessness. They don't have guns, they don't have weapons. And one guy with a rifle can show up in the middle of a market with hundreds, and he can do whatever he wants and no one can stop him. So people despise Hamas, but with Hamas returning, there was a little bit of this notion of, well, who else is going to protect us?
well, let's get into that, okay? Now you have this new deal, phase one, hostages release. Supposedly some more aid is getting in, and there's supposed to be like a little bit more normalcy. The Israelis pulled back, but I feel like the details of who's going to be in this force, is Hamas going to disarm, who's going to run Gaza, that has not been worked out. And you also have, all these countries that put pressure on Hamas, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, the Gulf, to pressure Hamas to take the deal. They have their own interests.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe Trump put pressure on them to get them to take the deal. Now, what's the incentive to keep putting that pressure on Hamas to do this next phase? Disarm, stand down, let a new administration come in. Like, is this just phase one, and then we're in this kind of limbo where phase two never happens?
Precisely that. One of my biggest concerns is the gap between phase one and phase two is widening. And as that happens, there's a significant risk of stagnation, of stalemate, such that you don't really have any significant movement forward. What we have for phase two is strictly theoretical, in the sense that,
Right.
other than the presence of 200 U.S. service men and women, the presence of the civil military joint coordination center, you don't really have anything tangible as far as phase two. You don't really have anything concrete as far as you have ideas of what nations want to join. You have possibilities for how you're going to compel Hamas. You have broad frameworks for this board of peace, but it's not. It was interesting to hear Mr. Kushner yesterday speak about it as if it's a fait accompli, when it's not real. It doesn't even exist.
Well, I
Like,
thought it was interesting that Vice President Vance was saying, oh, well, everything's working as good as it can be. We need some patience. These things take time. I do think to an extent that that's true, but it's very clear that this kind of, officials have called it babysitting, this kind of steady flow of U.S. officials, whether it's Wickoff and Kushner, Vance, now Rubio's going out to try and make sure that the Israelis don't take any sign or any opportunity to go back in and tank the deal. But at the same
Precisely.
time, you said there's a real possibility that, this stagnation could lead to, you know, Hamas, a new civil administration with Hamas in it under the guise of stabilization.
Well, as I was speaking to a friend earlier today, and she was talking about, will this that's a lot of firepower for the United States to have officials, to have, the Vance and
Oh,
Witkoff and
yeah.
Kushner and yeah, like this. So to me, that signals deep commitment by the Trump administration to really making this work. He's put a lot of political capital, he being the president, into making this work. However, my concern is that we could face a scenario in which there really is a longer term partition of Gaza into East and West Gaza. There really is, and one that's like under the Israeli control, and this is where.
Where I'm going to just put a finer point on that, where the reconstruction will be starting,
Certainly,
right?
certainly. And this is areas past the yellow line.
Right.
And for the listeners, that's the imaginary yellow line. But the Israelis recently started actually deploying yellow bricks all along the line to show because civilians were wandering in to the yellow area and getting shot. So the Israelis have made a point to actually demark the area very clearly, which I think is actually positive just for civilian safety. But so I'm very concerned also. Like, you go back to your point, your original question. So I'm thinking of the classic carrot and stick, right? So what carrots could the Qataris and the Turks bring to bear to get Hamas to do disarmament, accept the board of peace, when they said, we won't disarm, we won't accept the board of peace, we want to be we will have, it was so interesting. They said, we won't govern, but we will have an overarching security role over Gaza. This statement was made explicitly, but it kind of seems to have flown over the radar. To me,
But
this
the
is
president took that as a yes for the deal.
but this literally was made, like, I think 5 days ago or 4 days ago. To me, this is like the biggest statement that
Right.
Hamas has made since the deal. And I don't think why we continue to engage in this mirage of, well, Hamas said they're going to disarm, so they're going to do it. And if they don't do it, we'll do it for them. And if they don't do it, they'll be obliterated. Okay.
Bad things will happen.
Like what can be brought to bear that this mighty Israeli military itself hasn't been able to do for the last couple of years, other than basically allowing Israel to go back. But like, the president and the U.S. are saying explicitly the war is over. There's no war.
Right.
So your threats then become by default empty words, because you're saying there's no return to war, but we're going to obliterate you if you don't disarm, even though you said you won't disarm. I don't get the circular logic here. There's zero logic. And by the way, I want to be on the record clear. I am so grateful for the diplomacy of President Trump and the current
Yeah, he
administration.
deserves a lot of it was a significant feat, and, even what we have right now, while not perfect, is still a lot more than we had a few weeks ago, and the hostages are back, and, the fighting has stopped. So,
Precisely that.
right.
Precisely that. So I don't at all belittle or dismiss what was achieved. I just fear that significant time has passed since, like significant time is passing with inaction. So let's go back to the Qataris and the Turks. My biggest fear, and I have conversations behind the scenes that suggest this is in fact already happened, and this terrifies me to no end. This actually genuinely keeps me up at night, is that the Qataris and the Turks have convinced Hamas that there's a pathway for them to be recycled in the new security apparatus. And one of the ways in which that has shown is that they convince them not to wear not to wear their military uniforms since the ceasefire, and not to do large scale parties and celebrations when handing over the hostages. So that's number one. Number two is that if Hamas can basically be convinced to just focus on being a political party, even with their guns, they with the caveat that they would actually give up on attacking Israel in the future, then they would actually have a role in Gaza's future.
So it's not their removal, it's their rehabilitation, is what you're
Precisely
suggesting.
that. So several players, and there's another player involved in facilitating that I'm not at liberty to mention right now, but they believe that Hamas can be rehabilitated. Now, I personally want to use a lot of four-letter words to say how ridiculous that is. We have Hamas is a ridiculous organization that is not to be trusted. They are only invested in Israel's destruction. They will never moderate. They will never come around. And it is foolhardy to think, and I'm not saying let's go right back to war. I'm simply saying this foolish idea of, instead of another October 7th happening 9 years later, like the gap was between the last Gaza war and 2023. This time it'll be 20 years later. They will still do another attack. There will never be transformation in Gaza by the Arabs. I'm talking to the Emiratis. I'm talking to reps of the Saudis. They're furious. They have been pushed aside in favor of the Qatar and displaced in favor of the Qataris and the Turks. The Qataris alone
Displaced by the U.S.?
displaced in the negotiations during phase one.
On phase, yep.
Uh, Displaced in the deal making, if you will, and that was visible in a variety of ways. Publicly visible how they were displaced and how they've expressed their displeasure. And so the underpinning for the Arab position has been, we will rebuild Gaza, but we need no Hamas, not a penny goes in while Hamas is there. Same with the Europeans, of course. And B is, we want a pathway towards Palestinian statehood to once and for all end the conflict so that we all end up normalizing relations, especially Saudi Arabia. Instead, the Qataris may single-handedly rebuild Gaza alone.
I don't know that they can afford that, though. They can
Oh,
afford a lot of it. Really?
50 to 70 billion. Are you kidding me? The Qataris can 1000% redo it, because what they received in return is this security pact to the United States. They have now that facility at a U.S. Air Force base. They could very well end up with a fifth.
Yeah, they really made out on this. They really made out on this strike by the Israelis.
Well, and they could get access even to the F-35 fighter jet program, which the UAE didn't, and the Turks are also trying to get back into the program, and they're going to get some F-16s and some sanctions relief, etc. And so, if the Qataris single-handedly rebuild Gaza, which they absolutely could afford it, 1000%, then Hamas will absolutely remain in the strip. Hamas will be recycled. And then we could face a situation where this point about the International Stabilization Force becomes a moot point, because Hamas is just, kind of tolerated and accepted. It gets rehabilitated. Then the question becomes, how likely is Netanyahu and the Israeli government to accept it? Is this something that the U.S. and Qatar are counting on dragging out until the next Israeli election, where you get a moderate Israeli government that can fully withdraw from Gaza and basically pull out all Israeli troops and let Hamas take over the whole strip so that the
Like it was before October 7th, though.
precisely. So that is a very real scenario.
That
Very
Israel would
real
actually
scenario.
do that?
Come again?
That Israel would actually do that?
Well, that is an open-ended question. That's the outcome, right? So what inputs do you feed into the process to get there is the challenge. Um and so yeah, it's getting difficult to
Listen,
imagine.
listen to this kind of in terms of the bigger picture, okay? Netanyahu has said he wants Israel to be the super Sparta, right?
Mhm.
This lone, isolated country. But Israel, as you know, is experiencing this kind of existential shift where more Americans, as we talked about in the beginning, are starting to sympathize with the Palestinians. Republican views are, this MAGA crowd is also starting to become anti Israel. And these Israeli military agreements expire in 2028. So, as someone who bridges these commitments, how do you see that?
Well, I think there's a real risk that I mean, President Trump himself, when I said earlier he put a lot of political capital into this process. If he's if a Netanyahu does something that significantly degrades the agreement and gets us in a place where it stalls out, or if he is convinced that the lack of progress is strictly because of Netanyahu, he could very well escalate his position, his rhetoric, his views. I mean, you saw I don't know, that was a more of a question. Did you see that 60-minute segment and some of the statements that Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner made? I think
Yeah,
if
if you guys, if you haven't seen it, you should check out this 60 minutes from the other day. It's really kind of telling about how this administration views the end of the
which
conflict.
tells you that as much as people might think Miriam Adelson might quote unquote control Trump, there is absolutely a scenario in which Trump and that wing of the conservative movement could absolutely escalate their rhetoric against Israel if they feel that they're being slighted or disrespected or that Israel's taking them for granted in a way that could very well compromise the renewal of the security guarantee or the annual aid package and some of the other on the horizon. It doesn't mean the U.S. will fully abandon Israel per se. It's just that this will further widen the gap between the US the large segments of the US public versus the view towards the exceptional and a special relationship with Israel. So I believe that what a lot of the United States is conveying to Netanyahu is that the success of the deal is not just important for the people of Gaza and their future prospect, though it certainly is.
It's important for Israel too.
Pre- Precisely that, to begin the process of hopefully reversing some of the serious damage to Israel's posture in the region
And the world.
and the world, but especially in the region, because believe it or not, like the world will fall in line if there's progress with the Palestinians, if there's a de-escalation of violence. Certainly the West Bank is going to be the next
That's what
flashpoint.
I wanted to ask you about. So, you know, people say, Hamas is this kind of real constituency of the Palestinian people. And you say, no, a lot of people are against Hamas. But you also have the Palestinian Authority and Abbas, who is, 20 years into a 4-year term. He has no legitimacy either. So where do we go in terms of identifying? I don't even want to use the word moderate, but normal non-Hamas Palestinians who can help, build the future Palestinian, not only state, but institutions, unite Palestinians, try to heal, have relations with Israel. How do you find them? And, how do you help empower them?
So, I mean, I get asked that all the time, and in fact, that's one of the things I want to try to be a part of, though it's difficult because it's very. I mean, and I've come, as much as I loathe the term moderate, I've come to embrace it. Pragmatist, practical, moderate.
Pragmatists.
But the challenge is moderates need wins to emerge and to be empowered and to stand before their people and say moderation pays off. Moderation wins. Moderation brings a better life. Moderation stops violence. It stops these crazy settlers going into your town and doing as they want with full IDF protection or without the IDF being able to do anything to stop them. Moderation means Gaza becomes developed, assuming, of course, that Hamas is out of the picture. But moderation, because a lot of people, I still have this battle with a lot of Palestinians when I speak about the nation building agenda, moving away from the resistance agenda toward the nation building agenda. There is this belief that, well, Israel will never actually allow Gaza to be developed. And that's where the perpetual victimhood mentality and this
Right.
perpetual that, like, we can't even bother to try because Israel is just never going to allow us. So we might as well just build those tunnels or just leave. And I really despise that. And so I really think that if we were to, this is why I champion a Gaza first approach in pursuit of radical pragmatism that can expand the model to help new generations of leadership emerge. The truth of the matter is, we two things are true at once. We don't have a shortage of talent. We have a ton of Palestinians who can perform miracles if given a real chance, with their education, with their commitment, with their nationalism, with their desire to shape a new future. These are mid-level professionals and highly driven young people that tens of thousands of whom, and neither you nor I know their names, but they are academics, they are journalists, they are bureaucrats, they are poets, they are government workers, they are in every finance sector, they are tech startups and engineers and coders. They're in every sector of society, and they are ready and grasping for a chance to rise up and be part of a new generation of leadership. Unfortunately, the way Palestinian politics has been set up is corrupt and horrendous to the core. You have to be a part of Hamas or Fatah or the PLO or like all of this archaic infrastructure. You can't be a young, pragmatic, political persona and somehow serve and rise, and like you will be, like, people will try to smother you. So the answer is they both exist but they don't exist. And so how do we reconcile that? How do we actually proceed without waiting for a Mandela or a Martin Luther King, because that's not coming. And I don't think that's the right mindset, to keep waiting for this hero that's going to free us. I think that time has passed. And not just for the Palestinian people. I think for a lot of different communities around the world. The world is unfortunately too fragmented, too localized, too, as much as we want to think about unity and we're all in it. Look at the United States, look at the European Union, look at even like parts of California that are like East California, West California, Northern California, Southern California. Like, I believe that the West Bank and Gaza have their special circumstances. They're separated politically, they're separated culturally and geographically. They should each have their own capacity to build leadership, to develop, to grow under a broad umbrella of a state of Palestine that adopts a federal model but doesn't use this centralized government,
Right.
old Soviet style governance, which is what the PA is right now. And only then will you actually begin, coupled with creating space for nonpartisan um, governance and leadership development, only then will you actually have the emergence of highly capable leaders that within a decade or two maximum will saturate the entirety of the state of Palestine in Gaza and in the West Bank. There will be a new political class, and hopefully one that is not defined by the lethargy, the corruption,
The
the old
victimhood.
rhetoric, and the victimhood. And will celebrate and cherish a sense of agency instead of hiding and running away from it. I
Amen.
think also part of that sense of the lack of agency has been externally imposed. A lot of, the Western academic theorists that keep telling the Palestinians, no, you're savages because Israel made you that way. No, you're acting like, 1, 2, 3, because you're the victim. You're the occupied. So you have a carte blanche to do whatever you want on October 7th.
Right,
I
right.
also think the other side of this is that I think it's easier to be the victim. You don't have to do a lot of hard work.
Sure. Yeah. Listen, we've taken up so much of your time. I really appreciate it. I want to just close on a couple of last things. You wrote you see a fleeting opportunity to galvanize global outrage to push for a Palestinian state, but if the moment isn't seized now, it could be gone for good. You had that, remarkable event at the UN where, close to 200 countries recognize the Palestinian state. Does it mean anything, and does it mean anything is my question. Is that fleeting opportunity there, or has it closed as a result of this war?
I think Gaza is the first stage for realizing said opportunity, for creating Gaza as an effective role model for Palestinian self governance, showing that the Palestinian people, when given a fair chance, can absolutely govern and produce and not be aid dependent and not be entirely reliant on handouts from the international community. I think that is entirely doable. My main the main issue though is that with statehood and with recognition comes responsibility. And I think unfortunately, even as a and again, this is not blaming the victims. This is not belittling what the people of Palestine and the people of Gaza have
It's
gone through.
agency.
Precisely. Like, we have to start by getting away from Hamas, but even stepping back bigger from that. There's Hamas, and then there's the umbrella narrative and set of narratives that Hamas has benefited from, that Hamas has leveraged, and that you will find somebody who is not a member of Hamas regurgitating similar narratives about, it's all Zionism, it's all Western capitalism, it's all colonialism, it's all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, without any desire to, and then you're like, well, can we please move forward in a constructive way? Can we please look at the two-state solution not as a temporary step in, eradicating Israel while we gain force, but can there actually be a real possibility of living with accepting that Israel is here to stay? And some people will tell you, well, Israel is not going anywhere. Some people will tell you, yeah, well, there's the end of times prophecies, blah, blah, blah. And some people will tell you, no, I will never accept the Zionists, even if I accept the two-state solution. Some people will say no, but some people will say yes. Some people will say yes minimally. Some people will say, yes, I would love to go and work in Israel. So there's an economic component. Some people will be like, I have Israeli friends. I want to build relationships with Israel. So there's tiers of opposition and tiers of optimism. And that's of agreement and hope and optimism for a better future. And so that's where I feel that the recognition of the state of Palestine, those nations shouldn't just say, okay, well, we gave you a state. We recognize the state. Bye. Good luck. I think there should be a continued kind of engagement that uses said recognition as incentive to entice and induce further behavioral change that is positively rewarded, particularly when I said how moderates need wins to showcase to their people.
And I think that's, I think, and we're going to close in just a minute, but I encourage you to subscribe to the Radical Pragmatist. You heard a view today, folks, that you're not going to hear from most Palestinians, most any Israelis, most Arabs. This is someone who has such a thoughtful and nuanced and textured view of the conflict. Um, I think that's, even though the administration didn't want to really commit to a two-state solution in the deal, A, because Israel was working on that, paper with them, and B, but I think also they talk about the pathway to a Palestinian state, and that pathway, I think, is kind of creating the space, taking the agency. I mean, you could take it to mean that, and that's what people like Salam Fayyad and, years ago when President Bush was talking about reform of the Palestinians, I think that's what they were talking about, which is, you know, create the state. And then, when you get that two-state solution and there is a state of Palestine, it's not just in name and kind of land only. It's an actual functioning state.
Precisely that. Precisely that.
Yep. All right. Well, Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, the radical pragmatist, Realign for Palestine at the Atlantic Council. We'd love to have you back. Thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. And we look forward to following more of your stuff.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. And hopefully next time there'll be some progress that we can both feel good about.
I hope so. Okay. Till
Thank you.
next time. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye bye.
Cheers.